Welcome, dear listener. It's time to let the world fall quiet. Let your thoughts settle like leaves drifting gently to the surface of a still lake. You are safe here, wrapped in the hush of evening, warm in your covers and held by the soft rhythm of breath. Tonight I will tell you a gentle story, a story of reflections and memory, of moonlit stillness and quiet connection, of a woman named Clara and the face in the lake that wasn't hers, but felt like home. There is no rush now, just the soft echo of the wind through trees, the hush of water unbroken by time, and a love that moves slowly, like moonlight across a glassy surface. So close your eyes if you haven't already. Let your shoulders fall, and let yourself drift gently into the first part of our story. The forest was quiet in the way old forests often are, not silent, but reverent. Birdsong had given way to the hush of dusk, and soft shadows stretched between the mossy trunks like threads drawn from dreams. Clara sat on a wooden bench just a few steps from the lake's edge. It had become her evening place, a ritual carved in stillness. A steaming mug of tea cupped gently in her hands, a blanket across her knees, and the water before her, so still it seemed painted. She had come to the retreat seeking peace, not escape, not answers, just space to breathe, too slow to remember what quiet felt like. But what she didn't expect, couldn't explain, was the reflection, not hers. Each evening, as she gazed into the water's silken surface, the image that gazed back was almost right. A woman, yes, her hair, her posture, her shawl. But the face was not her own. It was gentler, perhaps, eyes softer, lips holding a faint, knowing smile. And though it should have unsettled her, it did end. Single quotes. In fact, she stayed longer each time, not out of curiosity, but comfort. The reflection made her feel. Remembered. At first, she had blinked and shaken her head, tried to laugh it off, a trick of the light, a tired mind, a mirrored leaf falling just so. But the face remained, evening after evening. The same warm presence looked back up at her. Sometimes it blinked when she didn't. Sometimes it tilted its head slightly, as if listening. Clara never spoke aloud. She simply sat and let the moment stretch. The world had grown too fast, too loud, too sharp. But here in the hush of pine and the hush of lake, something softer called to her. A memory that wasn't hers, a life she hadn't lived, but somehow quietly longed for. She didn't question it, didn't write about it in her journal, didn't mention it in the quiet group dinners at the retreat. It was hers, this quiet ritual, her own soft secret waiting at the water's edge. And in the reflection, she wasn't alone. The days passed gently, as if time itself had slowed to match the stillness of the lake. Clara rose early, walked the misty trails that looped through the forest, and spent slow afternoons in the sunroom of the retreat, reading books whose pages she sometimes forgot to turn. She spoke little, but smiled often. The other guests seemed to understand, the kind of understanding that needs no words. But every evening, as the sky blushed into dusk, she returned to the lake, always alone, always quiet, always drawn. She would step carefully along the pine needle path, the hush of her footsteps muffled by moss and earth, her shawl tucked close, hair loosening from its braid, a slow breath, the exhale of the day, and then she would sit on the same bench in the same gentle stillness and wait. The reflection was always there, faint but clear, not haunting, never haunting, but present, a warmth in the gaze, a softness in the brow. Some nights, the woman in the water seemed to smile. Other nights, her expression was still, watching, almost wistful. Then one evening, Something changed. It was small at first, the kind of thing you might not notice unless your heart was listening. The reflection's lips moved just barely, a whisper of motion. Clara didn't speak. She simply tilted her head, the way the reflection often did. The woman in the lake mirrored her again, and then, once more, mouthed a word Clara couldn't quite catch. There was no sound. Only wind gently nudging the trees, the faint ripple of a leaf touching the lake's edge. But Clara felt it, not a word exactly, but a sensation. Welcome. That was what it felt like. As if the reflection was not simply showing itself, but greeting her, inviting her deeper into a moment that had always been there, waiting. From that night on, Clara returned even earlier. She brought a small lantern, a book of pressed flowers she never opened, and sometimes, though she never fully understood why, she hummed soft, wordless tunes, the kind of music the wind might carry, the kind that didn't need a beginning or end. And when the light began to fade, the lake shimmered like a veil between worlds. Her own reflection would waver, and the other face would take its place, familiar, gentle, timeless. She never spoke. Neither did the reflection, but something passed between them, an exchange that didn't need language. The kind of knowing you feel in the stillness between heartbeats, and in the quiet that followed. Clara felt more present than she ever had before, like a part of her that had long wandered had finally found a place to rest. The forest deepened into autumn, though time passed softly at the retreat, as if the days chose not to count themselves too loudly. The leaves began to turn, not in a blaze of glory, but in a hush, a quiet golden fade, as if the trees were whispering their goodbyes to summer. Clara returned to the lake as always, but on one particular evening, something about the air felt different, not colder, not stormy, just full, like a moment about to become something more. The sky was a gentle gray, streaked with pale rose clouds. The lake ever still reflected the sky so perfectly that it was hard to tell where water ended and air began. The reflection was already waiting. Clara sat slowly, smoothing her shawl, her breath even. The woman in the water smiled again, this time more fully. Her eyes softened with recognition. There was something bright in them, not glowing, but alive. Present. Clara blinked, her heart moving gently beneath her chest, like a rowboat on calm water. And then, for the first time, the reflection moved independently, not mirrored, not echoing. It tilted its head and stepped forward, but not in the water. Out of it, first. It was only a ripple, then a shimmer, like a heat wave rising from the surface, and then slowly, as though time was hesitating out of reverence, a figure emerged, a man. He stepped from the lake without sound, his form soft and hazy at the edges, as if still wrapped in memory. His clothes were simple, a white linen shirt, sleeves rolled to the forearm, dark trousers. Barefoot, yet leaving no footprints, he looked not surprised to see her, but quietly relieved, as if he had waited a very long time. Clara did not move. She didn't speak, but her eyes met his steady and wide, and in them she saw something she couldn't explain, a depth, a familiarity, a warmth that settled beneath her ribs and stayed. The man approached slowly, respectfully, and stopped, just at the water's edge, close but not too close, as though he knew this moment belonged to her. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice as soft as falling rain. Clara didn't answer at first. She didn't need to, because something deep inside her, the quiet part of the soul that never forgets, had already begun to stir. She nodded once, and a smile touched her lips. "Who are you?" she whispered finally. The man's gaze held hers, and instead of answering with a name, he simply said, You knew me once, not a riddle, not a game, just truth. Clara felt no fear. Only a strange, glowing peace, as if her heart had finally heard the echo it had been calling out into the world for years. They stood like that, facing each other, the lake behind him shimmering like glass. The air was full, but not heavy, as if time itself had taken a breath and chosen to rest a while with them. And when Clara finally sat back on the bench, the man sat beside her, not touching, not rushing, just there, like he had always been. Evening folded itself gently around the lake, wrapping everything in a quiet hush. The stars blinked awake, slow and scattered, their pale light barely touching the surface of the water. Clara sat beside the man in silence. They didn't speak, and didn't need to. The stillness between them was full, not empty. Not the silence of strangers, but the silence of those who understood each other long before words were ever needed. He sat with his hands folded softly in his lap, head slightly bowed as if listening to something in the night. His presence wasn't loud, wasn't demanding. It was steady, like the rhythm of waves on the far shore, always returning, always familiar. Clara studied the curve of his profile in the moonlight, the way his hair curled slightly at his temples, the calm slope of his shoulders, the softness in his expression. There was no urgency in him, only patience. A kind of patience that said, I remember waiting, and I'd do it again. I don't know your name, she said, barely above a breath. He smiled, eyes still on the water. You did once. She looked down, hands curled in her lap, in a dream. He turned to her then, fully gently, and nodded. In many, he said, some that felt like stars, others like rain. You always found me by the lake. Clara let out a soft laugh, though it caught in her throat not from sadness, but from the strange, fragile awe of remembering something you never meant to forget. And now? She asked, is this another dream? His gaze held hers, kind and quiet. It doesn't matter, he replied, only that we are here. They sat together for a long while, the moon climbing slowly through the trees, its reflection drifting like a coin across the water. At one point, Clara leaned forward, elbows on her knees, her hands cradling her face. The man leaned slightly, too not touching her, but near. Sometimes, she whispered, I feel like I've been missing something for so long, but I don't know what. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached down, picked up a smooth, flat stone from beside the bench, and gently placed it into her palm. She looked at it. It was warm from his hand, smooth, simple, ordinary. But when she turned it slightly, it shimmered faintly, a glimmer like morning dew catching light. It's not what you've been missing, he said, voice low. It's what you've been carrying. Without knowing, she stared at the stone, and then without meaning, two leaned against him, just a little, her shoulder brushing his, her head finding the hollow just below his collarbone. He didn't shift, didn't startle. He simply let her rest there, as if she always had. The trees above them whispered slowly. The water stayed still, and in that hush, Clara felt something inside her begin to unclench, not loudly, not suddenly, but like a hand that had been gripping too tightly for too long. Finally letting go, the stone lay warm in her palm. The man breathed softly beside her, and the night held them both unhurried, undemanding, and deeply, deeply kind. The stars hung low above the lake now, mirrored so clearly in the water that it looked like the sky had fallen and come to rest at their feet. Clara still sat close, beside him, her head resting softly against his shoulder. The quiet between them had deepened, grown more comfortable, not empty at all, but filled with the gentle hum of something longed for and finally found. They hadn't moved in some time, and yet not a moment felt wasted. There was no need to speak, no need to fill the silence with anything but breath and stillness. He turned slightly, just enough to adjust the shawl that had slipped from her shoulder. His fingers were warm, careful, familiar. She looked up at him as he tucked the fabric back in place. Their eyes met slowly, gently, and held. No searching, no questions, just recognition, as if they had always known one another in a place. Deeper than time, Clara's voice came like a sigh, carried on the breeze. Why do I feel like I've known you forever? His gaze didn't leave hers. Because you have, he said, in the ways that matter. She smiled, then a soft, private smile, like one that blooms when no one else is watching. And he returned it, a breath of warmth behind his eyes, a tilt of his head toward her, unspoken tenderness in every quiet motion. They rose together, slowly, walking toward the edge of the lake. The water was still, dark now, but threaded with silver where the stars reflected. They stood side by side, close enough that their hands brushed. The breeze moved through the trees behind them, carrying the scent of pine and earth, the faintest touch of wood smoke from the retreat far behind. She closed her eyes. I don't want to forget, she whispered. You won't, he said. Not truly. The heart remembers even when the mind can't. And then softly, with a patience born of centuries, he reached for her hand. Not to hold it tightly, not to claim it, but to rest his fingers gently over hers. And no weight, no pressure, just warmth, just presence. The lake gave no sound, but it shimmered faintly, like it was exhaling too, and they stood like that. A man. From memory and a woman waking into peace, not trying to name it, not trying to keep it, just being. The wind slowed, the trees stilled, and the moment folded around them like a blanket of breathless calm. The night had grown full and soft. Not dark, never dark, but hushed, like the world had drawn a slow breath and was holding it gently, just for them. Clara and the man stood at the lake's edge, their hands loosely intertwined. Above, the stars shimmered like dew, and below, the water mirrored every glimmer, every sigh, every still moment. She turned her head slightly, resting her temple against his shoulder. No words left to say, none needed. The air around them felt suspended, as though time itself had stepped back, offering this quiet, sacred pause. After a long while, the man shifted, just a little. He faced her, his other hand rising too gently. Tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingertips lingered for a second longer than needed. Clara leaned into the touch. You'll go back, he said softly, as if reading the breeze more than speaking. I know, she replied. But the stillness, he whispered, will go with you. Clara nodded slowly, eyes glistening with calm. And you? She asked, voice barely more than breath. He smiled, slow, gentle, steady. I will always be here, in the hush, in the lake, in the part of you that remembers. And with those words, he began to fade, not disappear, not leave, but dissolve, like mist at sunrise. A soft blur at the edges, a return to the water, to memory, to the quiet. Clara didn't feel sorrow, only stillness, only peace. She stepped closer to the water, watching as his form shimmered back into the reflection. There he was again, not beside her now, but within the lake's calm surface, a figure wrapped in time and dream, always waiting, always watching with quiet affection. She sat once more on the bench, her hands in her lap, her shawl wrapped close, her eyes steady and soft. The lake was still, but now the reflection smiled, And this time she smiled back. The stars drifted down, settling gently across the lake like a lullaby written in light. A breeze stirred the pines, whispering a rhythm. The heart could follow, and Clara let her eyelids grow heavy. Let her breath match the hush of the night. Let her soul rock gently on the rhythm of something older than time. In the stillness, she heard his voice one last time, a whisper like the soft lap of water against stone. You are never alone in the quiet, and the lake was at peace.